Hangzhou, a city where centuries-old temples stood in solemn grace beside glinting steel skyscrapers. The scent of incense from ancient altars mingled in the air with the warm aroma of roasted chestnuts sold by street vendors. In this poetic fusion of heritage and progress lived a small Muslim family, quietly tucked away from the gaze of wider society but firmly rooted in unwavering faith. Their home was modest, their lifestyle simple, yet their presence, especially the presence of their daughter, radiated an extraordinary calm. Amina, just 18, was unlike any girl in the neighborhood. By 15, she had memorized the entire Quran and spoke both Arabic and Mandarin with fluency. She possessed a gentle, curious soul and a serene demeanor that masked an ocean of contemplation. Her eyes didn't sparkle with teenage defiance but shimmered with sincerity, as if Quranic verses whispered silently behind her gaze. She was never loud, yet when she spoke, even adults leaned in, not because she demanded attention, but because truth, in its purest form, never needs to raise its voice. Her father, Malik, was a Sudanese man who had embraced Islam decades ago. He had first arrived in China on a cultural exchange program, but it was in a quiet library, seeking refuge from a summer storm, that he stumbled upon a copy of the Quran. Night after night, he read in silence until the words no longer felt foreign but like home. That journey led him to Lianhua, a gentle Chinese librarian. She was intrigued by the sincerity of his newfound faith, and over time, her heart opened to Islam, not through persuasion, but through watching Malik live with kindness, integrity, and humility. Their marriage, though uncommon, was a union of souls long before society could comprehend it. Amina, their only child, grew up surrounded by Quranic recitation and classical Chinese poetry. Her parents taught her that Islam was more than belief. It was a way of walking humbly through the world, of feeding the poor without boasting, of smiling at neighbors even when ignored, of upholding dignity without arrogance. Every week, Amina and her mother would visit the city park to distribute food to the homeless. Each time she handed a meal, she would whisper in her heart, "May Allah bless this soul and guide mine." Then came a morning that shifted their rhythm. Malik returned home with a rain-dampened flyer in hand. In bold red characters it read, "Interfaith Harmony Forum. Open dialogue on spiritual peace." The city's grand cultural hall was to host the event, bringing together monks, scholars, philosophers, and thinkers from across China. One of the keynote speakers caught Malik's eye instantly, Monk W. Xiao, a figure renowned throughout Asia for his writings on spiritual freedom and detachment. "We should go," Malik suggested, "for Amina to listen, to understand other views. That's part of our faith, too." They had no idea that day would change everything. On the day of the forum, the sky hung heavy with clouds and streets shimmered from the rain. Amina wore a soft white hijab and a pale blue overcoat. She carried a small mushaf in her bag, not for display but as a quiet companion. The cultural hall buzzed with diversity: saffron-robed monks, Confucian scholars, Western academics, and students with notebooks. The scent of aged wood and sandalwood incense permeated the air. Calligraphy above the stage read, "Unity without uniformity." Malik, Lianhua, and Amina took seats midway through the hall. Amina sat silently, hands folded, eyes drifting between the speakers. When Monk Xiao rose, the room fell still. Tall, poised, his voice carried the calm of someone used to reverent attention. He spoke on peace, detachment, and freedom from fear. But soon his tone darkened. Too often, he said, religions that come from outside our land bring not peace, but division. They bind the soul with rules. They command through fear, not love. He never named Islam, but he didn't have to. Amina felt something stir inside her. Not anger, not offense, just a quiet unease. She gently reached for her mother's hand. "Annie," she whispered, "may I speak?" Lin Hua looked into her daughter's eyes, steady, clear. She nodded. "If you speak, speak with wisdom." When the floor opened for questions, Amina rose. A few heads turned. A couple of chuckles echoed faintly. What could a teenage girl possibly contribute among scholars? She stepped to the microphone, voice gentle but as clear as sunrise. "My name is Amina," she said in fluent Mandarin. "I am a Muslim. I have a question for Monk Xiao." The monk nodded politely. "Is peace found by removing all rules, or by following the right ones?" A ripple moved through the hall. Yao replied, "Rules can be cages. Real peace comes when the soul is free." Amina tilted her head. "If freedom means doing what we want, is it okay to hurt others, if it makes us feel free?" Silence. A deep pause. "No, of course not," he answered. "Then that is a rule," she responded gentle. Her mother wrapped an arm around her. "The sun makes people squint too, my love, but we still needed to see." Outside, Hanzhou carried on. Temples ringing, scooters buzzing, incense rising. But inside that apartment, a new silence had begun. Not the silence of fear, but of something waiting. And in a distant monastery, far from the city's noise, Monk Xiao watched the same 90-second video. Again. He was no longer listening as a teacher, he was listening as a seeker. 3 days had passed since the forum, but Amina's words hadn't faded. If anything, they had grown louder. The city of Hanzhou, with its bustling markets and mist-veiled temple rooftops, felt changed. It was as if even the wind had stopped to listen. In university lounges, screens replayed the forum footage on loop. Subtitled clips traveled across borders, across languages. The voice of an 18-year-old Muslim girl had broken through boundaries of geography and faith, but not all who heard were moved to celebration. One morning, Amina awoke to the sound of her father's footsteps, slower, heavier than usual, approaching the living room. Malik stood at the door, holding an envelope. No name, no return address, just a red stamp from the local district office. He opened it slowly. "Effective immediately. Your weekly food distribution in Xinga Park is suspended due to permit non-compliance." He read it twice. Then he placed it silently on the table. Lin Hua stood nearby, a teacup in hand. She didn't speak. Her sigh said enough. This wasn't about permits. It was about discomfort, about the unease that arises when truth comes from a place society didn't expect. And rather than confront that truth, people often try to silence the voice that speaks it. Later that afternoon, Amina and her mother stopped by a local bakery. The shopkeeper, once warm and chatty, asking about Amina's studies, looked down as they entered. "I think," he began, hesitating, "it's best if we pause your order for now." "For now?" Lin Hua asked softly. He didn't raise his eyes. "Just to be safe." There was no further explanation. Just silence. A silence that clung to them like the drizzle outside as they stepped back into the grayness. That night, Amina sat by her window, her mushaf unopened in her lap. She wasn't looking at anything in particular, just letting the world blur into shapes of light and shadow. In the corner, her father sat, writing in his journal. He paused, glanced up at her, and asked, "If you could go back, Amina, would you change anything?" She shook her head. Number. But I wish it didn't hurt people. Truth often does, he said quietly, especially when people have lived comfortably in lies they didn't even know were lies. Across the city, far from curious eyes, Monk Wiao sat alone in his private study. The monastery library, once his place of peace, now felt foreign, like a home that no longer recognized him. He stared at his tablet, paused on a still frame of Amina, her face upward, eyes serene, expression calm. He pressed play again, then again. Each time she said, "Maybe rules aren't cages, maybe they're bridges." Something shifted inside him. That evening, his disciple, Jianhui, entered with a tray of tea. He placed it gently beside his master. "Shifu," he whispered, "you haven't slept since the forum." "I'm not tired," the monk replied, gaze still fixed. Jian sat down beside him. "Are you upset about what happened?" Wiao finally turned from the screen. "No," he said slowly. "Not upset, just undone." "Undone?" She didn't argue to win. She asked to understand, and she made me realize I've spent decades seeking emptiness, but I don't know what to do with fullness. Jian said nothing. He had never seen his teacher like this. Gentle? Yes. Wise? Always. But never vulnerable. "I need to speak with her again," Wiao said after a long pause. "Not as a monk, not as a teacher, just as a man with questions." A quiet request was made, through a cultural liaison. 2 days later, a letter arrived at Malik's apartment, sealed, courteous, and brief. "You are invited to a private interfaith reflection at the Harmony Center. No media, no audience, just honest dialogue." Malik hesitated. After all that had happened, the risk was real. But when Amina read the letter, her voice was calm. "I want to see him." Her mother looked worried. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Amina replied, "not because when I spoke at the forum, I saw his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was lost. And sometimes confusion is just a soul waiting for light." The Harmony Center was nothing like the grand cultural hall. It was circular, quiet, unassuming. No stage, no podiums, just a round table, soft mats, and the scent of jasmine and sandalwood in the air. Wiao arrived early. No ceremonial robes, just a plain gray tunic. He looked older than before. Not in years, but in weariness. The kind that comes when one's inner world begins to shake. When Malik, Lianhua, and Amina entered, he stood and bowed low. "Thank you for coming." A soft spee. "You don't have to do anything right now. Just be honest with where your heart is." "I don't want to go back," Wiao admitted. "Not because I hate who I was, but because now I see how much I was missing." And in that moment, for the first time in his adult life, the monk felt something rare. Peace. Not the peace of detachment, but of connection. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the bamboo groves. Inside, a spiritual awakening had begun, not with thunder or fire, but with a veil, a voice, and a quiet truth that had filled an old silence. Lives. Back in Hangzhou, the change was subtle, but undeniable. Some who had once crossed the street to avoid Malik's family now offered hesitant smiles, their greetings tentative but warmer than before. A few teachers, once distant, gave Shamina respectful nods in the hallway. Then, one morning, a note appeared on their doorstep. "Thank you for reminding us what faith is supposed to look like." The ink was blurred, perhaps by the rain, perhaps by tears. If Abdul Hakim had hoped his quiet conversion would pass unnoticed by the powerful, he had misjudged. In China, the headlines began to shift tone. First came intrigue, renowned monk seen in Muslim prayer. Then came condemnation, cultural betrayal, or personal choice. Within days, state-run media hinted at foreign ideological threats endangering spiritual harmony. The implication didn't need spelling out. His decision was no longer viewed as private. It was seen as subversive. He was stripped of every academic post. His lectures vanished from university archives. Bookstores stopped carrying his publications. The monastery he had called home for decades closed its doors to him. But perhaps most painful of all was the silence from those he once called brothers. No letters, no calls, no visits. It wasn't rejection, it was erasure. And yet, Abdul Hakim smiled more in those days than he had in years. One evening, as he sipped tea with Malik after Maghrib, beneath the soft glow of a lantern, he said, "I used to speak in rooms that applauded every word, but I felt hollow. Now I whisper only to God, and my heart is full." Malik nodded. "You lost the world, but you found yourself." Abdul Hakim looked upward. "I lost nothing worth keeping." But the fire was spreading. The story of Amina and Abdul Hakim rippled across the world, from Africa to Indonesia, Turkey to South America. Her words were translated, shared on blogs, podcasts, and independent media outlets. Her calm reasoning, humility, and unshaken belief became a beacon for many. Yet, in her own city, the air grew dense with unease. One night, a rock smashed through Amina's living room window. The crack echoed like gunfire. Her mother screamed. Malik ran to the front gate. Spray-painted in red across the wall were the words, "Go back to your country." They called the police. Officers arrived hours later, sluggish, indifferent. One shrugged. "Probably kids." Another leaned closer and muttered, "You're drawing too much attention." There were no arrests, no investigation. That night, Malik boarded up the broken window with his bare hands. Inside, Amina sat in candlelight, her Quran closed beside her. Leon brought her a glass of water, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You can cry, you know." Amina looked up. Her eyes were dry, but her voice trembled. "I'm not afraid, Ammi. I'm just tired. Why does truth make people so angry?" Her mother knelt beside her. "Because truth burns away the lies they've wrapped themselves in, and not everyone is ready to feel that heat." The next day, Amina did something no one expected. She recorded a short video, just 2 minutes. No editing, no music, no special effects. She stood in front of the shattered window, patched with wood, and looked straight into the camera. Her voice was steady. "My name is Amina. I was born here. I go to school here. I breathe the same air, walk the same streets, but now I'm being told to leave, just because I believe in God." She paused. "I didn't shout. I didn't insult. I just told the truth. And if that makes me a threat, maybe it's not me you fear, but the light I carry." Her voice softened. "If faith makes me an outcast, then I accept it. Because I'm not alone. God is with me, and that's enough." She ended with a gentle, "Assalamu alaikum," and turned off the camera. They uploaded it anonymously. But it didn't matter. The world already knew who she was. Within 24 hours, the video was translated into 15 languages. Muslim communities across continents reposted it with a shared hashtag, #voice behind the veil. A Christian pastor in Canada tweeted, "Faith like this humbles even those outside her tradition." A Buddhist monk in Nepal wrote, "Her voice reminded me why I first sought spirituality, not for pride, but for peace." Even secular journalists admitted, "We need more voices that speak gently but carry fire. But where there is light, darkness always follows." That same week, Abdul Hakim received One morning, she sat in the rooftop garden her father once built. A single tulip bloomed in a clay pot beside her. She rested her mushaf in her lap, tracing the pages slowly, not reading aloud, but listening within. Her mother brought tea and sat beside her. "You've changed, Benua," she said gently. Amina looked over. "For better or worse?" Her mother smiled. "For deeper." They sat in silence until Malik came upstairs holding an envelope. "From abroad," he said. The seal read, Alamar Institute for Interfaith Engagement, Istanbul, Turkey. Inside was a letter, not from a journalist or an administrator, but a student. "I used to hate the veil. I thought it was weakness. But then I saw your video. I heard your voice. Now, I think strength looks different than I was taught. Thank you for being brave without shouting. Thank you for making me think. I don't know if I'll ever wear the veil, but now I understand why someone would." Amina folded the letter and tucked it into her Quran. She didn't need platforms or microphones. That letter was enough, and in the Andang Mountains, Abdul Hakim had transformed. No longer the monk with answers. He was the seeker with tools. Each morning, he swept the masjid courtyard, brewed tea for guests, washed prayer mats with his own hands. On Fridays, he gave brief reflections, not sermons, but soft words on stillness and being found. People came in ones and twos, a farmer, a traveler, a single mother. They listened quietly and left with softened hearts. One evening, a group of young Buddhist men arrived. One had studied under Abdul Hakim before his conversion. "We didn't come for a debate," the student said, "just to sit." And so they did, in silence, for hours. As they prepared to leave, one of them whispered, "I've never felt this quiet before." Back in Hangzhou, Farid published his final piece. It wasn't an article, it was a reflection. When truth whispers, the world leans in. He told the story of a girl who never asked for attention, who didn't preach, who just spoke the truth, and let truth do the rest. In his final paragraph, he wrote, "She didn't become a symbol by design. She became one by sincerity. In a world screaming to be heard, it was her quiet conviction that made the world finally stop and listen." The piece went viral again, but Amina stayed home. She spent time with her family. She still visited the park. No more food distribution, just quiet Quran recitation from a bench, just loud enough for the wind to carry it. Sometimes children lingered. Sometimes old men listened from a distance. Sometimes no one came. But she never missed a day, because it was never about who heard. It was about who needed to. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived at her school. Not from the media, not from abroad. It was from the school principal. She opened it slowly. "Dear Amina, I owe you an apology. In trying to protect this institution, I failed to protect what mattered most: truth, spoken with dignity. I watched your video again last night, not as a principal, but as a father. I didn't see a rebel. I saw the kind of child I hope to raise. You reminded me that silence is safe, but not always right. You are welcome here. Always." She folded the letter and smiled. Years passed. The world moved on, as it always does. New controversies, new crises. But in quiet corners, people still whispered about the girl in the white veil. Her words were quoted in sermons. Her video was used in ethics courses. Her name etched into hearts, even those too proud to admit they had changed. Amina never wrote a book, never took a stage, never sought fame. But her truth lived longer than most shouting matches ever could. Far away in the mountain village, Abdul Hakim never rebuilt his old monastery. Instead, he planted olive trees where it once stood. One day, a village boy ran to him. Teacher, someone's here, from Hanzhou. She says she brought something. He turned. Amina stood at the edge of the orchard, a few years older, holding a small gift. A handwritten mushaf, copied in her own careful hand. For your masjid, she said, placing it in his palms. He opened it. On the first page in soft calligraphy, to those who seek light behind veils, behind doubts, behind silence. His eyes glistened. You still carry the flame, he said. She smiled. It was never mine. I'm just the lantern. That afternoon, they prayed beneath the olive trees. No cameras, no microphones, just faith, just light. And as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the orchard glowed, as if the trees themselves were whispering, "Thank you."